Hi everyone, Teri Wellbrock here. First off, I just wanted to send out a little apology for not putting an episode out last Friday. But I am back on Hilton Head Island and recording, and so excited to put this episode out tonight. You ever just meet someone and you just instantly, your souls connect, your heart? Just absolutely love this guest. I even wrote, as I do my show notes and write notes after the interview, and I pulled this one out. I heart her. So yeah, absolutely loved meeting this beautiful soul who you're going to listen to today in this beautiful conversation. So inspirational. A lot of aha moments for me, learning from her. On a personal note, the reason why I didn't put an episode out last week, and it's been a little bit of a pause, I guess, in putting 2 episodes out. I was doing the Healers of Hilton Head series, adding those in as little surprise episodes throughout the week, is because my mom was diagnosed with liver cancer and cirrhosis of the liver. Again, for those who have been longtime listeners of the show for the past 5.5 years that I've been doing this, know the history with my mom and her addiction history. And then she was on a road of sobriety for, 2.5 years, with maybe one hiccup, maybe one little fall off the wagon. But she's 87 years old now, and she ended up in the hospital after a fall, and then we brought in hospice because she's elected the no treatment route for this liver cancer. Pretty massive growth on her liver, and she's ready. She's wanted to die since I was a kid, and has told me that every day of my life, pretty much, that she doesn't want to be in this world, wants to be in the other next world. So we had hospice come in. I granted that wish and reached out to hospice, and she was given some pain meds, and those pain meds had a pretty profound effect on her, and she started hallucinating. And so she ended up in hospice, in facility hospice instead of home care hospice. And so I hopped on a flight and flew back home to Ohio and spent the past week with her. And it was so needed for my soul in so many ways. It was good to spend time with my sister, who I've missed tremendously, with my mom, with my nephews I hadn't seen in a while, my son, one of my children who lives in Cincinnati still. It was just so good to be there. I didn't bring any of my recording equipment with me, so hence no episode last Friday. But the really awesome news is, I think how profound love and just presence can be, because my mom had this amazing, miraculous rebound, and we ended up bringing her back home after a very scary one night in a all I can describe as a hellhole, a horrible, horrible facility that was so filthy, and I couldn't wait to get there the next morning to get her back out of it. I didn't know until that night because they transferred her there. But to have her back home and sitting there and laughing and reminiscing with my sister and me and my mom, it just brought sheer joy, and my heart just overflowed with love in that moment. And my mom is doing so much better. She's elected to stay home instead of an assisted care or long-term care facility, and we're bringing in as much support as we can for her. So Council on Aging has been amazing. Hospice has been amazing. We just feel so very blessed. My friends are amazing. My family, my sister, my nephews, the grandchildren. It's just been wonderful to see everyone surround her with so much love. I know she's struggled with her addiction, but she's a beautiful little soul, and I just adore her. And I hope her end of life journey is a peaceful and love filled one. So, any prayers or positive energy you would like to send my mama's way, I so very much appreciate it. I know she appreciates it. And there you go. All right. Now for today's amazing, wonderful, awesome, loved this interview. Enjoy. I just realized I wanted to add a PS. So, for those who also know my trauma history and my panic attack history and all that I've been through and going through EMDR therapy, and the whole reason I work in the trauma recovery arena is triumph over trauma. So that's what I've lived to do, is to continue to triumph over all of that trauma I experienced in my life. And so even in the midst of all the chaos that was going on and all that's been happening, just, gosh, in the past 2 years, between my mycotoxin poisoning and my mom's spiraling and her health issues and so much more, I've continued to work on helping myself along this healing journey, learning so much from these beautiful souls I interview from all over the world, and reading and researching, and just that hashtag never give up. So I again hopped on a flight. I was feeling very emotional. So when I walked onto this flight, I flew Allegiant because it's a nonstop from Savannah to Cincinnati, an hour and 19 minutes, which is awesome. And as I got on the flight, I was feeling emotional because I was headed to see my mom in hospice, and I didn't know if she was going to live. She was spiraling very quickly. And so I approached the flight attendants, the two that were standing there, who, I just want to sing their praises, were just the sweetest, kindest souls. And I said, hey, just wanted to let you know that if I suddenly burst into tears for no apparent reason on this flight, please know that I'm headed to see my mom in hospice, and I'm feeling very emotional. I have a history of panic attacks, although I no longer have them, but I'm just, because my emotions are heightened, I just wasn't sure how I was going to handle flying without Xanax, with, no, I guess, pharmaceutical crutch, like I had used for so many years. And I was just going to have all of my coping skills that I brought along with me: my Zen coloring book, my gel pens, my stones, my grandma's rosary. I brought my laptop and downloaded some movies on it. I had my meditation music, so all of that was with me. But I was like, oh, what if I'm not able to handle it? But then I was like, oh, what if I can? And so when I sat down in the seat and was getting myself settled in, the tears came. And so for about 5 minutes, I just let them flow. And the flight attendant, again, the one was so sweet and came by and had said, I had asked a question about when I could get my laptop out, and put my hand on my shoulder and advised me of when they would let me know when I could get my laptop out. But I just wanted to tell you all that because, one, I did it. Like, I got on those flights to and from Ohio, and I did it. There were no panic attacks. Yes, I allowed some tears to flow on that first flight, but that was just an emotion, and I allowed it. So all of these things we talk about so often on the show, just be gentle with yourself. Gift yourself whatever it is you need in the moment to help yourself along your own healing journey. So just wanted to tell you, sending you love, and I believe in you, and you've got this. All right, now for this great episode. Welcome, everybody, to the Healing Place podcast. I'm your host, Teri Wellbrock, and I just had an amazing conversation for about 10 minutes with my guest here today, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we need to talk about all of that again, because it was so wonderful. So I'm welcoming today. And Steph, I totally forgot to ask, is it Sarazin?
That's right.
All right, I guessed. Woo! And she is a grief educator, an experiential expert in ambiguous grief. So welcome, Steph.
Thanks so much for having me, Teri. I'm so happy to chat with you.
Me too. And we were just talking about how important these conversations are in talking about these heavy subjects, but in a way that relatable to folks that can say, oh my gosh, me too, or oh my gosh, I had no idea. So talk to us about this role of ambiguous grief educator.
Sure, sure. Well, I like to say I'm an accidental researcher in ambiguous grief. It isn't anything that I set out to do intentionally, to kind of work in my adult life. But in my own midlife trauma and profound pain, went in search of understanding what I was experiencing, in search for healing, just desperate to feel better. After nearly 20 years married, in a wonderful marriage that I adored, I learned that it wasn't what I thought it had been. Made a discovery that led to divorce, and it broke me in two. It was, an experience of grief like none I had known, and I was immediately looking for somebody to talk to who could share their experience with me, somebody who had been through this as well, um, and could kind of give me their textbook of notes. Here's what you do, here's why, and understanding it, and then some things to do to move forward. And I just felt so stuck. I couldn't intellectualize what had happened. I couldn't make sense of why this grief felt so different. And without anybody coming forward, and I kind of poked around and asked some people for, do you know a friend? Do you have anybody who, experienced, the end of their marriage abruptly, or, through a discovery? And no, 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 no. It was just nobody willing to talk about it. And I was certain that I was not the first person to have this experience. And I began to just kind of, pick and get curious about why nobody was talking about it. And I wrote to authors. I started reading studies. I interviewed my therapist incessantly, and by talking to clinicians and just asking these questions, I soon found that it's certainly not that this is an isolated incident, but that there is an element of shame or embarrassment that is often internalized by the person grieving, and so they isolate and grieve alone. And as I began to understand this and then write about it myself, it had been, some of my essays had been picked up on online publications, and then I started hearing from people saying, I was so glad to read this. It's been so hard to find anything. There's a dearth of information on betrayal trauma, but there's plenty on divorce. But nothing quite specific to what I was seeking. And as I began to dig in a little further, I found that my grief was different because there was no physical death. And so ambiguous grief is this experience of grieving the loss of a loved one who is still living, but there's been a significant change or break in the relationship as it once was. And we don't do physical death grief super great in our society as it is. We often have trouble even saying, death or dead or dying, right? And so if we don't do that inevitable experience well, my goodness, how can we expect to do any other kind of grief, well either? And so I set out to really pick and understand what exactly made it different, what were the nuances to ambiguous grief, and develop tools to help heal.
Beautiful. Wow. And I so related to on a soul level because I did the same thing with my own trauma history of just trying to find and just clawing at, give me some answers so I can understand this. But back to the shame part of it for just a second, and just clarify for my personal. So the
Mhm.
shame component, is that the part that's where you're looking like, what did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? Is that part of it? Because I know with my own journey that we talked a little bit about,
Mhm.
came to the conclusion I didn't do anything. It wasn't. It's that, like, trying to take it on yourself so you can try to make sense of it. Like, what did I do?
Right. Yes. And so, in my personal experience, the discovery and then the divorce is what I call an activating event, or which clinicians call an activating event. But there are several others, including incarceration, um, familial or friendship estrangement, addiction, Alzheimer's, dementia, any kind of cognitive decline, including a traumatic brain injury, um, indoctrination into a cult or a gang, imprisonment, incarceration. Did I mention that? Gender identity, and uh, and really any significant mental health crises, right? Are activating events that can change the relationship as it once was, and for all of those events that I just listed, depending on how the person internalizes the change of their loved one, um, they can feel that shame or embarrassment because of their attachment to their loved one. And for a myriad of reasons, they may not see addiction as an illness and see it as a lack of will. And so, they feel shame that their child is battling substance abuse, right? And so they don't tell anybody that their child is has run away and is 19 years old and living on the streets somewhere. Their families don't know because they feel shame about sharing the truth of it.
Thank you for
And
clarifying that. Okay.
yes, yeah, and in my particular case, what I found is that women were not sharing their marital infidelities because they were reflecting that upon themselves. And it took me some time to say, hang on, wait a minute here. I did not do this. I had been a faithful wife, and this shame is not mine to carry. However, that took a while to get to, and it it really kind of, when you excavate those emotions, at the bottom of it is, what are other people going to think? Are other people going to think I'm horrible to live with? And or that I'm a horrible, for those parents I just referenced, what will people think of our parenting? They will think we have done something wrong. And so what I found is that people don't talk about their ambiguous grief if they're internalizing shame and embarrassment because they don't want to be talked about. And we can do better. We can change the conversation. You're doing a great service in having this podcast and bringing on individuals who are talking about trauma and trauma healing in a way that can help to normalize the way that we support and and help one another heal.
Right. Gosh, I mean, you really just shine such a huge light on that I hadn't quite thought about before. I know, just because, me personally, if someone does have the courage to put out, let's say on a Facebook post or something, that their child is struggling with addiction, like, my first reaction is just to embrace them with love and compassion, understanding. But I can't understand how they would be so fearful, because there are those who may be struggling themselves or aren't along the healing journey enough to be judgmental or think, what did they do wrong as parents? Wow. Yeah, and we can do better. You're right.
Right. And so, when if you're in a group and somebody, and another adult says, "Oh, did you see so and so posted on Facebook? What do you think that's about?" And it's kind of a scoop seeking conversation. Um, I think it's I think it's admirable to shut that down and say, wow, let's not gossip about this. It must be a really difficult time for her. And that was a lot of courage she took, I think, to share that. So let's see how we can be supportive.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
And
I wonder how we can help. Right.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And sometimes how you can help is by not gossiping about it. Right? There may not be much you can do, but one thing that isn't additive is speaking about another individual's trauma or their grief of any kind in a salacious or gossipy way.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So now how do you work with folks in an individual level, on a group level? Do you have programs?
Right. So yes, over the last couple of years, uh, I've taken certifications and learned how to meet another person or a small group in their grief. This wasn't what I had set out to do, and I know that's the case for you as well. But in trying to, heal myself, from my pain, I learned so much along the way, and um, I wrote a book on a guidebook. It's the book I had wanted all those years ago, but couldn't find. And it's Soulbroken, a guidebook for your journey through ambiguous grief. And it has tools and writing prompts and practical advice from not just my own story, but the story of others from different activating events to help you along as you heal. And I prefer one-on-one grief guiding, to help people understand their grief and embrace it, which it is really hard to do and even hard to digest at the beginning. I had one woman say to me, "I can't imagine I'm ever going to embrace this. I don't want it. It's the worst thing that's happened to me. I just want it to go away." And I understand. It's so much pain, right? And yet, grief, I believe, I know it in my bones that grief is a portal to our greatest and our highest selves if we allow it. And yes, it hurts and it's brutal. And yet, it can do so much to transform us.
Gosh, Steph, you had my head tingle, which that's always a good sign on this show.
Yeah,
My heart, my eyes welled up with
Mm.
tears. I have goosebumps on my arms. Like that was the whole gamut right there because it is a portal. I've lived it. I know it.
Yeah.
It is, I told you before I hit record, when I went through my grief journey, I cried for a year and I thought I'm never going to get over this, through this. But wow, you're right. When you do the work, when you're willing to go into that darkness and then you come out into the light, it really is, there's so many gifts that come out of it. I know it's hard to see when you're there in that muck and that darkness. So thank you for that
Right.
work you do to hold people's hands and, reaching your hand back into that darkness and saying, listen, I've been there. Come with me and we can come out of this. So
Yes. And thank you. You just, I know, I see that in you. Right. And, it's, I've described myself before as a guide, not a coach. I've walked this path and there are many ways to heal and find healing. And there's no time limit, to kind of go through and work through your grief. And as you well know, it's not something that you do sequentially and voila, you come out the other side and it's done, right? It's a transformative path we take where, you might go in kicking and screaming, and I'll guide you through. Eventually, as we emerge, at some point, the life on the other side is your grief is still there, but you're carrying it differently, right? It's integrated in a different way than it was, when we when we started. And you said the work, and that's it, Teri. It is, if you're willing to do the work. Oh,
Right.
and right when I was writing my book, my editor had come back to me at one point, and she said, there's some connective tissue. That's what she called it. There's some connective tissue missing here. Could you kind of go back and dig a little deeper on this? And I said, no, I don't want to. Right? Because you know what that entails. It's hard. And oh, I know what this is. I know this is going to wring me from the inside out, but I also know it's important work, and she's right.
Yes.
And, so I think even though you and I are living life on the other side of our trauma and integrating the experience and sharing and kind of guiding others, we have to go back in sometimes and do the work. And I'm willing to be willing. And I say, to folks, if you're not willing right now, I understand. But if you can be willing to be willing, you're on the right path, and be gentle with yourself. And
oh my gosh, I love that. Willing to be willing. I can't be any more perfect and I love that you just said be gentle with yourself. I end all my shows that way, to be gentle with yourself. That's the key. That's a huge part of it. There were two things that really shifted everything for me when I first stepped onto the healing path. And one of those things was I read it somewhere in a book, and it was to be gentle with yourself. And it just, boom, oh, I had been so hard on myself. I should be over these panic attacks. Why can't I think my way out of them? Why am I experiencing this anxiety? And yes, and once I started being gentle, but I love that. Yes, being willing to be willing.
How are you gentle with yourself? What does it look like for you?
I think the biggest thing was I stopped shoulding myself. I should feel this way. I should be able to do this. I should. And I started just saying, this is where I am right now. It's okay to feel this way. It's okay to have these moments, these days, these weeks but keep moving forward. And I just started offering myself love and compassion. And that just changed everything, because I wasn't so hard on myself anymore.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Yes.
Stop shoulding yourself. That's fantastic. Yes. And without being kind of taught how to go through ambiguous grief, we don't have the societal norms that we do when there's a grief by death, right? When there's a grief by death, we're not great at it, but we know what to do, right? We know when our loved one dies that, we'll receive some condolence cards, some sympathy cards. We'll plan a funeral. We'll ask people to perform the, rituals within the funeral ceremony, eulogy and pallbearers or whatever, in our families that we do. But when we're grieving, a best friend who's ghosted us, or a parent who doesn't remember us, a child with addiction, or a partner to incarceration, how do we grieve that?
Right.
It's often so invalidating, because we don't have those societal norms to turn to and then be witnessed, right? And so I think there's a lot of shoulding that happens within the ambiguous grief community, because we don't know, right? Because there's just, what are the rituals we turn to? What is the process that we begin? How do we do this? Because that path is largely uncharted, right? But being gentle and releasing that should is just terrific insight.
Thank you. Well, and again, you just keep making me have those whoo, you see my little light bulbs going on. Because it's so true that I think because there aren't those processes in place in those rituals, that we shoulder just, it then becomes this burden that we're carrying all by ourselves, where when we have those rituals, like you said, even though we don't do it super great, at least we can cry on another person's shoulder, or other people can relate because we're talking about it, or we're crying, or we're going through that grief journey out loud, I guess is the way.
Yes.
Where
Yes.
if we're doing this ambiguous grief, we're not doing it out loud, or at least the majority of people, right? And so it just becomes this very internal process. And that's, wow, what a heavy, heavy weight to carry.
Right. And
Hence crying for a year.
exactly. No, it is. Yes. And, you know, one way that I tried to be gentle with myself was by really tuning in and getting quiet, which is harder than one might think in today's, ever loud space. But getting quiet and really tuning into what I needed. And what came up for me was that I needed to be witnessed. I was, grief is love, and it is proportionate. And so when your mail carrier gets a different route, or your barista is transferred, there's not a whole lot of grief. You might have some sadness because you really like them, but you're not in bed for a year crying, right? But it's because grief is proportionate to the love we held for somebody. So no matter what has changed the relationship, sometimes we don't know what has changed the relationship. The person just decides to leave us or ghost us. Then we're left kind of in this space of questioning all of it, right? And so for me, what I found was that having this marriage I adored being witnessed, was important. And I realized I was feeling jealous of widows. And I'm embarrassed to say that, but I'm saying it because it's the truth. And I mean no disrespect to anybody who has suffered the agony of losing their beloved. No disrespect at all. I found myself saying, oh, wow, I'm envious of her. Look at the way she's being doted on and loved, and look at how everyone is recognizing her loss. And I had this loss. I felt like a widow, but it wasn't seen that way by the community, right? And for goodness sakes, I didn't even tell my family and friends for 3 months because I didn't know what to say. Surely, had my husband of the time died, I would have notified people immediately and then started the funeral process and whatnot. But with the discovery and then the subsequent divorce, I didn't know what to say. And I stayed silent for 3 months, with the exception of one trusted friend and my therapist. And what really was transformative for me was holding a ceremony for my marriage. I call it a faux funeral. And rituals within a ceremony have been part of humankind for millennia, and for good reason, right? They help to mark important milestones in our lives, and we are so good at celebrating our beginnings. And if you don't believe me, go to any of your social media feeds later and look, and you'll see, baby announcements and birthdays and engagements and graduations and new businesses and giant scissors, and we know what to do, and we celebrate one another with these rituals and of these beginnings. But our endings really don't get much fanfare, right? And they're hard, they're difficult, and we don't share them as openly. When that business doesn't make it and they close their doors, we probably aren't going to see that post, right? But we saw the big scissors post. When that happy couple is cutting the cake at their wedding ceremony or at their reception, we see that, but when that marriage doesn't continue, we don't see the description of that pain, right? And that's it's not right or wrong. It just is not something we're comfortable doing, talking about our endings. And I realized I needed to mark my ending of a marriage I adored and just loved being part of. And so I invited two friends only, just the two who knew my marriage up close, the closest, the best, and had witnessed it. And I curated a little ceremony, Teri. I asked them to be at this place at this date, and it was a lovely lakeside spot at a public park. It didn't cost me anything to do this, and it doesn't need to cost anybody anything, and I curated some music that was important. I picked some 2 readings, and I invited them to share their memories of my marriage too. And it was so healing. I could feel it throughout the 30 minutes that we were there. But at the very end, when I received them, if you will, we were saying goodbye, and they hugged me and held my hands and spoke right to my face about their love for me and how sorrowful they are too. I finally felt validated. I felt that my loss was seen as important.
Yeah.
And I just still get choked up, talking about it, because it was just so important to me. And nobody said, "Oh, you can still have a funeral." Nobody suggested that. It was just what came from tuning in quietly to myself and really being able to understand what I needed. And so, for some people, I'm sure they're scoffing at this, saying, "Well, that's wackadoodle. I'm not going to go and have a fake funeral. Nobody will understand." And others, and that's certainly fine, but I know others say, "Oh my goodness, that's exactly what I need to do." Yeah. And so I encourage you, whatever it is that your center is speaking to you, tune in and listen, and then follow it.
Yeah. Well, gosh, one, I want to say I wrote a letter and burned it, and it was very ceremonial. Like I was watching that negative energy just leave in the smoke. And so, yes, and that was my own little way of part of the way of.
Yes. And those little ceremonies, those little, you and the moon and fire and paper and ash is wildly powerful. Yes. Wildly powerful. And yet,
because I said what I needed to say in that letter, right?
Yes. And then you gave it away, right? You let it go. And I always, and I write about this in the book too, but my goodness, Elsa, the Ice Queen, we've been singing her song for years now, "Let It Go, Let It Go." And yet, how, Elsa, how do we let it go, right? That's not something that we talk about. There's no song that says, "Here's how you let it go." We all know we need to let it go, but you just described, Teri, one way to help us let it go. And it might take people hundreds of those little actions, but one by one, little by little, a little becomes a lot, and we find ourselves releasing that pain, that anger, and then it transforms and we can carry it differently. And ceremonies like powerful letters like you just described are a great way to start.
Oh, thank you. And one last, well, I want to go back to something that you said in just a second, but as a little PS to what you just said, I did continue to write and burn and write and burn because it was a process. And then I did end up finding that in the end, like maybe I'm guessing with the last letter, because I don't even remember the last one I did. It just kind of faded, right? But it was almost as if I sent that person off with, "I wish you whatever it is you're seeking. I wish you love. I wish you joy," because I had transitioned into this place of like truly being able to let it go. And that was that part of it, of
Oh,
whatever it is you need, I wish you. And so that's how I transitioned. But I want to go back really, really quick to one. I cannot thank you enough on just a soul, human, light level for putting that very powerful truth out there about being envious of the widows, because it is so hard for us. Like, you're just this shining example of, it's okay to put your truths out there. It's okay to share those really powerful, I say truths again, because that's what it is. And so kudos to you. And I just thank you from my heart for that. So
I received that. Thank you. I
yeah,
really appreciate that. Thank you.
yeah, it's going to resonate with folks. I mean, truly, because it needs to be said out loud. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, gosh, I could sit here and talk to you for hours on end. So
Likewise.
yeah, is there anything else? Sorry, let me redo that. I'll edit my
Okay.
pen rolling out of here. Is there anything else that you wanted to address, or any avenue you wanted to go down?
I really just, so much of what you said, Teri, and just, listening to your past conversations, that you're having on this podcast, it's so important to tell our truth. And I think that a good indication of your own truth telling is what you just kind of brought out of me, and you're reflecting back. I understand, which is that I feel awkward saying it. And so if you don't know what your truth is, what is it that is hard to say, right? And no matter how much healing work you've done, what remains, right? What feelings, what experiences, what emotions pop up for you, and you're not really, too proud to talk about, or it's just difficult to talk about, or you find yourself wanting to push it down and not face it. That is a great way to meet your truth. And as interview guests every week, you allow them space to share their truth. And you are such a light. You are a lighthouse shining your truth, spanning the sea, looking for other truth tellers. And I think that in aggregate, that is what is going to help us help one another kind of move forward on that path, and collectively heal little by little. So tell your truth. And, thank you for being a lighthouse for us.
Oh, thanks again. You had me teary. Got me all welled up in the eyes again. Thank you for that. My heart's hugging yours.
Thank you.
You made me think about this conversation I had with my oldest son just last week, and he was talking about an incident where someone was discussing, a younger person than him, fresh out of college, was talking about someone who was suicidal and struggling and having a very, oh gosh, what's the word? It so went out of my head, but just this moment, a crisis moment, right? This person, and they were talking about this person being suicidal, and this young person had said, they should have just pushed him, kind of thing. It was a jumper on a bridge. And so my son reacted very gutturally. And so anyway, he responded to this young person in a very matter of fact, like with facts kind of way. And later I said, perhaps you were put in that young person's life for a moment, even though you were feeling very triggered, like you were put there in his life to help him understand. Maybe he needed that truth. He needed what you offered him, John. And so that's what I was just thinking, was when you were speaking and sharing that very powerful truth, is that there is someone listening to this show. I mean, I know we're recording right now, but they're going to be listening in this moment that needed to hear that from you. And so again, I'm getting emotional about it, because this is one of those aha moments in life where I realize, wow, when we put those powerful nuggets out, there's someone sitting, listening, on the other side of the world that says, oh my gosh,
Oh,
yes.
right. And gosh, this goes back to what you're saying in the beginning about shoulding, right? Because the first time I acknowledged that that's how I was feeling, I'm I'm feeling envious of a woman who has lost her beloved far too soon and tragically. What is the matter with me? I should not be feeling this way. I should not have this emotion bubbling up. I should not feel this. That's wrong. But who says how I should feel? It is that is the truth of how I'm feeling.
Yes.
And so, that's another clue, isn't it? Right? And here's my light bulbs going off is when we're feeling those shoulds, if we can isolate our shoulds, I should not be envious and jealous of a widow because she gets to receive people, because she gets to start a scholarship fund in his name, because she gets to regale her children with stories, right? I should not be feeling that way. Well, wait, what do I need? Why do I feel that? Because I didn't have the opportunity to have my grief witnessed and validated. Okay, so what can I do about it? Right? So if we pay attention to our shoulds, we might just find answers for some healing.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Gosh. Oh, well, and I'm thanking you too. I love the truth, looking for the truth tellers. I'm so going to use that. I'm just, again, you've given me a gift. So gosh, thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's been so nice to talk with you. Keep doing what you're doing. Your
Thanks.
work is so important, and I'm so happy to be part of it.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I just feel blessed to have met you and talked to you. So how do folks connect with you, find your book? Yeah, where do they find you?
Sure. So it's Soulbroken, and it's one word. On the cover, you'll see it in two. So I know people are, I'm hearing from people about that. But it's Soulbroken, and it was released just a couple of weeks ago in October. It's available at Barnes and Noble, on Amazon, at any independent bookstore. Target, you can find it just about anywhere books are sold, and it's also available in e-format and on Audible as well. So I hope that it finds the people who need it and they
Yes.
find something additive in it. You can also find me personally on my website, stephaniesarazin.com, and on social media as Stepping Through, STEPHING _THRU.
All right. Awesome.
And we're all just trying to make it through. So I'd love to hear from any of your listeners in any way. Thanks so much again for having me. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, me too. Absolutely. Well, thank you again for being here and shining your beautiful light of hope. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Well, everyone, thanks for joining us today on the Healing Place podcast. And remember, until next time, be gentle with yourself. Thanks. Bye-bye. Hey, everybody. Teri Wellbrock again. Just wanted to thank you for listening to the episode today and remind you to visit my website as well as the academy.teriwellbrock.com for the courses. But if you go to my website, teriwellbrock.com, you can sign up for my monthly Hope for Healing newsletter, which is also jam-packed with information and strategies and blog pieces and guest blog pieces and links to shows. And just a great space for thanks for again being here and being a part of this healing space. I very much appreciate you. All right. Bye bye.